Okay, let's dive deep. You send us this really powerful account about a conflict. It just erupted during like a music rehearsal,
Yeah.
but it clearly hit way deeper than just the music, you know? It sounds like it triggered some pretty significant personal stuff.
It's fantastic source material, really,
Well,
because it takes this one specific, pretty intense event
right.
and uses it to explore these, well, fundamental things about how we interact, how we handle conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission here for this deep dive is basically to unpack all that, find the really important nuggets of knowledge about handling those triggered moments and, communicating better, especially when emotions are running high.
Yeah, and those close relationships, right.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into that initial spark. The scene is two people working on a song together.
Yep, collaborating.
Things seem okay, then they find this issue. Parts they made separately just don't line up. Tempo's off.
Mm.
And the reaction described, it wasn't just, oh, that's weird. It went straight to anger, blame. This feeling that parts were, quote, hijacked.
Wow, strong word.
Yeah. And hammering was the word used for the blame. Intense. And it didn't just blow over. The argument apparently dragged on for days. That kind of reaction to, like, a technical detail, it says a lot.
It really does. It just highlights how creative collaboration or really any close work can become this kind of pressure cooker.
Totally.
Technical things, creative differences,
Yeah.
they stop being just about the work. They become these catalysts. They trigger much deeper emotional stuff, fertile ground for those underlying issues to just pop right up.
So, okay, after this intense thing happens, the source looked at some practical changes. What were the sort of immediate, like, quick fixes they found?
Well, one key practical thing was about when you share creative ideas.
Ah,
The
okay.
source mentions one person often shared really early, sort of unbaked ideas, while the other liked to work on things a lot more first.
Right, get it more solid.
Exactly. So the simple fix was maybe the creator should wait a bit, really get firmer on things like tempo, structure, in their own head before bringing the other person in. Build a stronger foundation for the idea first.
That makes a lot of sense, like having the blueprint clearer before you show the builder. What about the second practical thing?
Oh, yeah. A really concrete tool.
Mm-hmm.
Just using a metronome, using it earlier, using it more consistently.
Simple.
Yeah. Establish that clear tempo, stick to it. It gives you that shared objective reference point. It's just a straightforward way to stop that kind of technical mess up that, started the whole thing here. Simple, like you said, but potentially really effective.
Okay, so moving from the technical fixes back to the emotional side of things, that word hijacking, it's powerful. What did looking at that reveal about, creative dynamics?
Yeah, hijacking definitely carries a heavy load, doesn't it? It implies your creation was like taken, maybe misused, disrespected.
Right, touches a nerve.
For sure, especially in collaborative stuff. But a really interesting counterpoint came out of this experience.
No.
The idea that, well, even when you're working on someone else's idea, your creative input is always an expression of you, your unique perspective, your skills, your history. It all gets filtered through you.
Huh. So less about someone deliberately stealing something, maybe more like two different self-expressions kind of bumping into each other within one song.
Exactly that. And this led the person in the source to this really key question, something they learned to ask themselves when creating, whether alone or with others.
What was the question?
Is what I'm coming up with serving the song? Is it serving the lyrics? Is it serving the objective, the theme of the song?
Ah, right, shifting the focus.
Totally. It shifts it from, is this just my thing, to, is my thing helping the bigger goal? That change in focus is just vital in any kind of team effort, creative or otherwise.
That's a super helpful way to frame it. Now, this whole incident, and apparently others mentioned, led to looking deeper at a really big underlying theme. Self-esteem. How did that connection kind of surface?
Well, the dynamic they noticed was one person felt maybe less experienced musically, less confident,
Okay.
and they felt kind of overwhelmed, inadequate, when the other person, who was more experienced, expressed their self-esteem through the music. It showed how these imbalances in confidence in one spot can trigger really deep insecurities somewhere else.
Wow. And the big realization about self-esteem that came from that.
Maybe the most profound thing here, honestly. You absolutely cannot give someone else self-esteem. It's just not possible.
Mm.
It's something they have to build, to cultivate, and give to themselves. I mean, the word itself, right, self-esteem, points right to it being internal.
True.
And the Force even shared their own pretty intense journey with this, building self-esteem through some major adversity, like facing ridicule, even experiences with incarceration, domination.
Whoa, okay. Heavy stuff.
Yeah, definitely an extreme path. But they framed it as like an illustration of a pattern maybe others could recognize. This idea that building self-worth is hard, internal work. Sometimes you even have to kind of retreat from the outside world to do it. It
Yeah.
just reinforces that this foundation, it's built from the inside out.
That is, yeah, a really powerful take on where genuine self-worth comes from. So how does that internal self-esteem then link back to dealing with conflict with other people?
Well, the idea that emerged is that when you have two people and both have a pretty decent, solid sense of their own self-worth,
Okay.
it seriously increases the chances they can find a win-win situation when things get rough during an altercation. That inner security seems to create the groundwork for more flexibility, more objective understanding when things get heated.
But like we know, most fights don't really feel like win-wins are happening, so what's blocking that, according to the source?
Often it boils down to not really understanding your own needs in that moment.
Or the other person's needs?
The bilateral needs thing. Exactly. We get so caught up in the heat of it,
Mhm.
right? Before we actually stop and figure out, okay, what does this person actually need right now? What do I actually need to resolve this constructively?
And the insight is that you can actually see those needs, even when you're mad or upset.
Yes, that's the key insight. By sort of accepting the situation for what it is and then making an effort to really look closely,
Yeah.
you can start to see both your needs and theirs.
Huh.
Clearly seeing like, okay, your core need looks like this and my core need right now is this. That's presented as the absolute key to finding that win-win path.
Yeah.
But it happens after you accept the reality of the conflict, not, while you're still flying off the handle.
Which leads right into venting, because that often happens before anyone figures out needs,
Right.
right? The source described it as blaming, that hammering on the other person's flaws.
Right. And the source had this really fascinating take on why we do that, why we vent. It's seen as a reaction to triggered emotions, often old stuff, feelings we haven't processed that are bubbling up.
Yeah.
But the person is actively, maybe unconsciously, avoiding feeling those feelings themselves.
So the venting isn't really about the other person.
Not entirely. It's described as venting the resistance to feeling your own pain, projecting it onto the person or the situation that poked that old wound.
Wow, okay, that completely reframes it. It's not just, you're wrong. It's potentially, I don't want to feel my own old hurt, so I'll focus on you.
Exactly. Shifts the focus inward. And the source gives this incredibly simple but powerful question to ask yourself right when you feel that urge to blame or lash out. Am I venting?
Just asking that.
Just asking it can create that tiny pause, that moment of self-awareness. Huge.
Okay, so you ask yourself, am I venting? You realize, yeah, maybe I am. What's a really crucial realization from this source about how to shift that, especially in how you speak?
A huge breakthrough was centered around this phrase, please speak to me kindly. Yeah. And apparently the source initially kind of resisted this, worried that being kind might feel fake or stop them from speaking their truth.
I can see that tension.
Right. But the core realization they had was that kindness and authenticity, they aren't opposites. They actually balance each other out.
Okay, how does that work? How do they balance?
Well, the idea is when you manage to speak kindly while still being authentic, meaning you share what you see as the truth. You don't back down from it. It lets that truth actually be heard.
Ah, so kindness makes the truth receivable.
Exactly. It creates a space for it to land without immediate defenses going up. Kindness shows consideration. It shows care. It basically says, look, you're not a bad person. You're okay. You're good enough. But there's a reality here, a truth that we need to look at together.
So the kindness kind of gives you a license almost to deliver maybe difficult or triggering news in a way that's more likely to build connection instead of walls.
Precisely. It provides that foundation of trust, of consideration, that allows even tough truths to be received. And the source even mentioned a practical tool, like the feedback sandwich.
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
Right? Start positive, make the point that needs work, end with another positive or encouragement, just a tangible way to practice that kind, balanced approach.
That's definitely a tool anyone can try. Were there other big shifts in approach that came out of working through this?
Yeah, another really important one was about consciously switching modes, like internal modes.
Modes.
Yeah. The source described being in a very emotional, raw state when doing music, a state where triggers just hit way harder.
Okay, makes sense. More vulnerable.
Totally. So the strategy they learned was when an altercation started, they needed to consciously shift gears, move into what they called executive functioning mode.
Ah, like moving from the feeling brain more towards the thinking, organizing brain.
Yes, exactly that. Accessing a more objective, rational state. The insight is that intentionally making that shift during a conflict boosts your capacity for consideration, for objectivity. It
Hmm.
helps you navigate it more effectively instead of just reacting from that raw emotional spot.
Okay, we've hit practical tools, self-esteem, communication like kindness, shifting internal modes. But the source goes even deeper, right? To what feels like the most profound point. It's in that phrase, I'll hold you until we both disappear. What's the depth there?
Right. This one's big. It's built on this idea that relationships, they often act like mirrors. They bring up our unfelt stuff, old emotions, maybe even trauma, precisely so it can be healed.
Okay, the relationship as a healing ground.
Exactly. And the deep insight here is that when you get triggered, really triggered, in the presence of someone else, all the talking we do, it can actually become this really sophisticated way to avoid feeling the emotions that are surfacing.
Whoa. So we argue, analyze, explain.
Defend, blame, strategize.
Mhm.
Anything but sit with the raw feeling itself. Feelings that could be ancient, buried for ages. But the interaction is bringing them up to be felt.
Now, so we use words to kind of skate over the surface of the feeling?
That's the core idea here, yeah. It's a
Yes.
bypass, a way to avoid the discomfort, the potential overwhelm of the raw emotion. And the radical alternative proposed is, well, instead of talking,
Yeah.
just hold each other and allow those feelings to actually be felt together in silence, just being present with whatever raw emotion is there in the company of the other person.
Wow. That sounds incredibly difficult. So vulnerable, facing that stuff right there with the person.
Oh, absolutely. It is incredibly vulnerable. It means maybe facing fear or worthlessness or deep sadness right there, intensely with the person who triggered it. But the source describes the power in doing that.
What kind of power?
Experiencing those feelings, truly feeling them in the presence of another person, can apparently magnify the healing immensely. The outcome they described was striking. After they allowed themselves to just feel which involved, like crying, physical release for maybe 30 minutes or so,
Okay.
the talking that happened after that was completely different. It had great depth and truth, they said, because it was coming out of that shared emotional experience, not trying to talk around it or avoid it.
That completely reframes communication in those really intense moments, doesn't it? It's not always verbal. Sometimes it's just shared presence while feeling.
It really shifts the focus away from trying to fix it with words, trying to analyze it cognitively, and towards actually processing the underlying experience emotionally and physically, which then, apparently, clears the way for much more authentic and effective words later on.
Okay, wow. Let's just quickly hit those major insights again just to recap.
Absolutely. So first, that fundamental point, self-esteem. It's an inside job. You have to cultivate it for yourself.
Right. Can't be given. Second, kindness isn't fake or weak. It's the essential balanced authenticity. It lets the truth land.
Perfectly put. And finally, maybe the deepest one. In those moments of intense trigger, the most powerful connection, the real healing, might happen not through talking, but through just shared presence, holding space for the feelings to finally be felt.
Incredible depth, really, pulled from one, you know, music rehearsal argument. It really is. And it definitely prompts some thinking, doesn't it?
For sure. So for you listening, thinking about these ideas, identifying your own needs, checking if maybe you're venting your own pain onto someone else, and considering this radical power of silent shared presence when things get really triggered, how might these perspectives shift how you approach the next difficult conversation or the next intense emotional moment in your own relationships?
Definitely something worth pondering.